Welcome back to Insights, provided by Deloitte on Federal News Radio, 1500 AM and federalnewsradio.com. I'm Francis Rose. My guests are Deborah Golden, Federal Cyber Risk Services Leader for Deloitte, and Mike Wyatt is National Identity Management Leader for Deloitte. Thank you for being here today. We're talking about the secure piece of the secure, vigilant, resilient discussion. Define security and describe what it looks like in a cyber context. Let's start with you, Mike.
You bet. Secure really means protecting the assets of the organization, right? Identifying those assets and making sure the right protections are in place to preserve the value of those assets and make sure that the right people have access to them and the wrong people do not.
Deborah, the discussion in the Chief Information Officer suites and CISO suites all across government revolve now on this balance of strategy versus technology. What is driving that, and what seems to be pushing it more toward a strategic element where CIOs and CISOs aren't just the BlackBerry guy or woman anymore, where they're involved with formulating mission strategy for the agencies?
I think the big trend is associated with the understanding of one's boundaries and the impact of those boundaries systematically on the applications and the missions that are being supported by those boundaries. And at the end of the day, our adversaries are getting smarter in terms of trying to find the weaknesses in those boundaries. And it behooves the government and the executives to understand not only the technical piece of that, but more importantly, probably some of the strategic, particularly as people are looking, whether it be to upgrade systems or to introduce new technologies into the environment, such as iPads, or looking at mobile and medical devices. It's important to understand what's the strategy for securing those devices that are gaining access into these environments.
The gaining access piece of this is probably the most important thing that's driven the transition, Mike, from the CISOs and Chief Information Officers leading this to agency heads, directors, administrators, and so on wanting to be aware of what's going on. Is that fair to say, do you think?
It really is. Identity management is a business enablement capability. There is a risk mitigation factor as well, but it's no longer the internal IT group that are the primary identity and access management buyers. It really is the business, and it's really focused on mission enablement.
So the key here, it strikes me, for the secure piece of this discussion is building an effective risk management strategy. Am I on the right track?
That's absolutely correct. And again, understanding which areas to focus on when, based on both business risk, operational risk, financial risk, and technology risk to the environment. I mean, there could be instances where there's many legacy environments and they're weak from a security perspective. Do you look to secure those? Or do you look to secure things that are high risk in your environment, such as privileged access, such as production access, such as contractors having access? So there may be some things that you want to focus on from a risk-based perspective to look at first, knowing that there's a laundry list of things that likely need to be looked at.
So then you lay over top of that the identity management piece, Mike, where you have some folks that you want to have access to some things, some folks you don't want to have access to other things. What do those discussions look like successfully when they happen inside organizations?
I think the key piece is there needs to be involvement of the business. It should not be just a security function or an IT function making those choices. It's really a business process being enabled by technology, not simply a tool that you buy and implement.
And who all do you think should be engaged in those conversations? Because when you frame it like that, it sounds like we should have human resources people talking about job descriptions and who should be able to see certain things. It sounds like a pretty collaborative effort.
It is, and I think a lot of times it's easy to underestimate the fact that there are a lot of people aspects, a lot of process aspects in addition to the technology. And the most successful identity management programs incorporate all three, and I will say that technology is the last of the three. You really need to get the process pieces figured out first, and then choose the right tool and implement it.
Are you seeing organizations becoming more aware of the identity management piece, and what's driving that, do you think? Is it issues like we've seen with some of the high-profile security clearance issues, both physical and cyber, or are there other factors that are driving this, do you think, Deborah?
I think that might be one of the predominant issues, mainly because of the high-profile nature of these incidences, as well as the recent view from federal government themselves up on the Hill, and the pressure, quite candidly, for agencies to be able to address these situations that are occurring and have been occurring, quite candidly, for a long time. But now it's about the accountability and the responsibility of agencies to meet these needs. I do and completely agree with Mike's comment around this is a people, process, and technology approach. and that needing all three of those legs of the stool, if you will, to be able to solve these types of problems.
We just have a short time left, but let's talk about each of those. The people element of this we've touched on already. The process element, do organizations find that they have to change the way that they do business or the way that they decide who accesses what, or do they find that in many cases the way they've been doing it's okay?
You know, oftentimes there's a need to rationalize the processes because complex processes lead to risk. And so by going through taking the opportunity to streamline and rationalize those processes and then implement the tool or update the tool tend to have a lot better outcomes than just trying to take the as-is environment and putting it into a tool.
And the technology piece, obviously, every organization is going to be different, but as we saw from the Office of Personnel Management issue, there's still a lot of room for improvement on the technology side.
Yes, and I think even for some agencies to just understand what technology they own. A lot of times we see competing technologies in production looked at, being evaluated, and so sometimes I think it is taking a step back and looking at the possibility to lean processes, to lean some of the technology acquisition, and determine what might be the most appropriate for that particular situation.
Mike Wyatt and Deborah Golden of Deloitte, my guests. This is Insights provided by Deloitte on Federal News Radio 1500 AM and federalnewsradio.com.